The homeless girl's hands were shaking as she pressed down on the little boy's chest. His father, leather vest, Hell's Angels patch, was charging toward her, fury in his eyes. Sarah had seconds to bring him back before everything went wrong. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change her life forever. And what happened 72 hours later, nobody in that neighborhood saw it coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. The afternoon sun hung low over Riverside Street, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk. The air was warm, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and the distant promise of summer evenings. Everything glowed in that magical light that made even ordinary things beautiful. Through this golden hour, a little boy rode his blue bicycle. His name was Michael Peterson, 7 years old, with sandy blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile. The bicycle was his pride and joy, metallic blue with white streamers and a bell he rang at every corner. In the basket sat a stuffed bear named Captain. He'd gotten the bike 3 months ago and had ridden it every single day since. He knew every crack in the sidewalk, every house where a dog might bark, every corner where he needed to slow down. This was his kingdom. Michael pedaled with the confidence of a child who'd never known real danger. His face held that pure contentment only children can achieve. Complete presence in the moment. Just the joy of movement and sunshine. What Michael didn't know was that he had exactly 43 seconds before his world went dark. He rang his bell as he passed Mr. Chen's house. He waved at the neighbor's cat in the window. These small rituals mattered to him, made his world feel safe and wonderfully predictable. From the alley between 5th and 6th Street, someone else was watching. Her name was Sarah, though most people in this neighborhood didn't know that because most people didn't see her at all. 10 years old, she'd mastered the art of invisibility, not magical, but the kind that comes from survival, from learning that being unseen is sometimes safer than being noticed. She stood in the shadows between a dumpster and a fence, her small frame swallowed by clothes 3 sizes too big. The jeans were held up with a rope belt. The jacket was stained and torn. The sneakers had holes in both toes and didn't match. One was pink, one was brown. When you're taking shoes from a donation bin at 3 a.m., you don't have the luxury of finding a matching pair. Sarah's face was smudged with dirt, her hair an uneven mess because she'd tried to cut it herself, and her eyes held something no 10-year-old's eyes should hold, a weary understanding of how hard the world could be. She'd been living on these streets for 6 months. Before that, there had been foster homes, 3 of them in 2 years, each one proving that not all houses are homes, that sometimes the people supposed to protect you are the ones you most need protection from. So she'd run, decided that sleeping in abandoned buildings and eating from soup kitchens was better than pretending to be grateful for a roof that came with bruises and constant reminders that she was a burden nobody wanted. Sarah had claimed this alley as one of her spots. She'd wedged a flattened cardboard box behind the dumpster where she could sleep. She'd stashed a backpack with her few possessions, some granola bars, a library book, and a photograph of her mother that was creased from being handled too much. Her mother. That's where this all started. Jessica Turner, 28 years old, working 2 jobs, raising a daughter alone, and doing it with a smile that made Sarah believe everything would be okay. She sang while she cooked. She helped with homework even when exhausted. She called Sarah her little miracle and meant it. Then one day when Sarah was 8, her mother collapsed in their apartment. Just fell. One moment standing at the stove, the next moment on the floor, unconscious. 8-year-old Sarah had called 911 with shaking fingers and waited beside her, holding her hand, begging her to wake up. The paramedics said she'd had a cardiac event, undiagnosed heart condition. Nothing anyone could have predicted. She died at the hospital 3 days later, and Sarah's world ended with her. That was 2 years ago. Sometimes it felt like 2 lifetimes. Now, standing in her alley, Sarah watched the world pass by like she was separated from it by thick glass. She'd been watching this little boy on his blue bicycle for weeks. He rode past almost every day around the same time, always with that joyful expression. She wondered what that felt like, to be loved, to be safe, to have somewhere to go. She'd never spoken to him, never thought about it. You don't approach when you're invisible. You just watch and remember what it used to feel like when you belonged too. The little boy pedaled closer, his streamers dancing in the breeze, and Sarah found herself smiling just a little. There was something about his joy that reached even into her shadows. He rang his bell. The cheerful sound echoed down the street. Then something changed. Sarah saw it before he did. The way his hands suddenly went to his chest, the way his pedaling faltered. Just a tiny hesitation, barely noticeable. But Sarah noticed. She'd spent 2 years watching people, learning to read the small signs most folks missed. She saw confusion cross his face, saw him try to shake it off, keep pedaling. The bicycle wobbled. Michael's other hand left the handlebar, both palms pressed against his chest. His face went pale, color draining in seconds. The bike swerved. His feet slipped off the pedals. Sarah took a step forward, instinct telling her something was very wrong. The little boy's eyes went unfocused. His body went slack, and then, as if someone had simply turned him off, he fell. Not dramatic, just gone. Consciousness severed, his small body tilted and crumpled to the pavement, with the awful sound of dead weight hitting concrete. The bicycle crashed beside him, wheels spinning, captain thrown from the basket. For a moment, everything stopped. The world held its breath. Sarah stood frozen at the edge of her alley, refusing to process what her eyes had just seen. The sunny afternoon suddenly felt wrong, like the warmth was a trick. But he wasn't getting up. He lay on the sidewalk, one arm bent underneath him, his sandy hair spread across concrete, eyes closed, chest not moving. Not moving. That's what broke through Sarah's shock. The realization that his chest wasn't rising and falling, that he wasn't breathing. This was the moment. The one she'd been too young to recognize 2 years ago. The one she'd been helpless during. The one that had taken her mother while she sat beside her doing nothing. But she wasn't that helpless 8-year-old anymore. Sarah's feet moved before her brain caught up. She ran from the alley, mismatched shoes slapping pavement, oversized jacket flapping. She ran the way you run when seconds matter, when hesitation means death. She reached him in 5 seconds, dropped to her knees beside him in 6. Up close, he looked even smaller, more fragile. His skin had taken on a grayish tint. There was already a scrape forming on his cheek where he'd hit the ground. Sarah's hands hovered over him, shaking, her mind racing through fragments of memory, pieces of information from 6 months ago at a shelter across town. It had been a Tuesday night in January. The cold was the kind that could kill you, so she'd gone to the 5th Street shelter for a hot meal and warmth. They'd been running a community training program that evening, CPR and basic first aid, taught by a volunteer nurse named Miss Olivia. Most adults hadn't paid attention, but Sarah had watched every demonstration, listened to every word, asked questions after everyone else shuffled off. "Why do you want to know all this, sweetie?" Ms. Olivia had asked. "Just in case," Sarah had said. "I want to be ready." She'd been thinking about her mother, about that awful, helpless moment, about the promise she'd made that she'd never be unprepared again. She'd never expected it to be a little boy on a blue bicycle. Sarah checked his breathing the way Ms. Olivia had taught, leaned close, watched his chest, felt for air against her cheek. Nothing. Her heart hammered. Her hands shook worse. But underneath the fear was something else. A strange cold clarity, a sense of purpose that cut through the panic like a blade. She couldn't save her mother, but maybe she could save this boy. Sarah tilted his head back gently, checked his airway, pinched his nose, gave 2 rescue breaths, watching his chest rise. Then she positioned her hands over his sternum, one palm over the other, fingers interlaced. She'd practiced this on the training dummy 6 months ago. Miss Olivia had said hard and fast, "Don't be afraid to push. You're trying to manually pump blood to the brain. Broken ribs heal. Brain death doesn't." Sarah pressed down. 30 compressions, her thin arms working, her whole body putting weight into each one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She couldn't think about how fragile he looked. 10, 11, 12. Couldn't think about whether she was doing this right. 15, 16, 17. Could only count. 20, 21, 22. Could only push. 25, 26, 27. Could only hope. 28, 29, 30. 2 breaths, 30 more compressions. Her world narrowed to the rhythm, the count, the desperate attempt to force life back. The street was still quiet. Nobody had noticed yet. The crash hadn't been loud enough, and Sarah was just a homeless kid kneeling on a sidewalk, the kind of thing people's eyes skip over. But across the street, in the driveway of a small brick house, someone had noticed. Thomas Peterson was unloading groceries from his pickup truck when he saw it. The wobble, the fall, his heart stopped. Thomas was a big man, 6'2", broad-shouldered, tattooed arms, salt and pepper beard. He wore jeans, boots, and a leather vest with a simple patch across the back. Hell's Angels, Vice President, Riverside Chapter. But before he was Hell's Angels VP, before he was Brother Thomas, before any of that, he was Michael's father. Single dad. His ex-wife had left when Michael was 2, decided motherhood wasn't the adventure she'd signed up for. She'd moved to California, sent birthday cards sometimes. It had hurt like hell, but Thomas had learned to see it as a blessing because it meant Michael was his to raise, his to protect, his to love, with a fierceness that sometimes scared him. Michael was his whole world. He just set down groceries when he turned and saw Michael fall. Saw him not get up. Saw someone kneeling over him. Some kid. Some dirty kid putting hands on Michael. Thomas didn't think, didn't process, didn't analyze. He ran. 12 years in the Hells Angels. 20 years of bar fights and situations where violence was the language everyone spoke. All that muscle memory kicked in instantly. Someone was over his son. Someone had put hands on his little boy. Thomas sprinted across the street with frightening speed, boots pounding pavement, vision tunneling until all he could see was Michael's prone body and the stranger hunched over him. He was yelling before he fully registered what he was saying. "Get away from him! Get your hands off my son!" The words came out like thunder, like rage, like every protective instinct concentrated into a single roar. Sarah heard it, heard the fury, heard the pounding footsteps, heard death coming for her, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. She was on compression 19 of her second cycle. If she stopped now, this boy would die. So her hands kept pushing, kept counting, kept fighting for his life, even as a giant charged toward her with murder in his eyes. 21, 22, 23. Thomas was 10 feet away, face a mask of terror and rage, hands reaching to grab her, to throw her aside, to protect his son from whatever this was. 26, 27, 28. 5 feet away, close enough that Sarah could see the tattoos, the Hells Angels patch, the absolute conviction in this man's eyes that she was a threat. 29, 30. Thomas's hand closed on Sarah's collar, gripping the worn fabric, ready to yank her away. And Michael gasped. Not dramatic, just a small, wet intake of breath. His chest rose on its own, fell, rose again. Thomas froze, hands still gripping Sarah's collar, but his eyes locked on his son, on the rise and fall of his chest, on the color slowly creeping back into his face, on the small movement of his fingers. Sarah had stopped compressions the moment he gasped, hands still hovering, ready to start again if needed. She was breathing hard, arms shaking from exertion, face pale, but her eyes held desperate hope. "He's breathing," Sarah whispered. "He's breathing." Michael's eyes fluttered open. Confused, disoriented, he looked up at the sky, then at the faces above him. His father's terrified expression, the strange girl's exhausted relief. "Dad," his voice was small and hoarse. "What happened?" Thomas dropped to his knees so fast it should have hurt. His hand released Sarah's collar, forgotten as both arms reached for Michael. He gathered him up carefully, checking him over with shaking hands. "Buddy, you fell. You stopped breathing." His voice cracked. This man who'd faced down rival gangs without flinching was openly crying. "You stopped breathing." "I don't remember," Michael said. "I was riding my bike and then everything went dark." Thomas pulled him closer, one hand cradling his head, the other wrapped around his small body like he could physically hold him to this world. "You're okay," he said, but it sounded like he was convincing himself. "You're okay. You're okay." Over Michael's shoulder, Thomas's eyes found Sarah. The girl had backed up several feet, ready to run, looking like a wild animal expecting to be hit. And Thomas realized, really realized, what had just happened. This kid, this dirty, homeless kid he'd been about to throw across the street. She'd been doing CPR. She'd been saving Michael's life. He'd charged at her screaming threats, and she just kept going, kept doing compressions, kept fighting for a stranger's life, even with danger bearing down. Kept going when she could have run. Kept going because a little boy needed saving, and nothing else mattered. The silence that followed was profound. Thomas stared at Sarah. Sarah stared back, still poised to flee. "You!" Thomas's voice came out rough. "You saved him." Sarah didn't respond. Her whole body was still flooded with adrenaline, mind still caught in the loop of compressions. And please live, please live, please live. "You saved my son's life," Thomas said again, like he needed to speak it aloud to make it real. Sarah's eyes darted to Michael, who was now sitting up in his father's arms, looking confused but alive, breathing, present, the grayish tint gone, eyes clear. He was okay. The weight of that hit Sarah all at once, and her legs gave out. She sat down hard on the sidewalk, breathing in shaky gas, hands trembling. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. The thing she'd been too young and too scared to do for her mother. She'd done it for this little boy. She'd saved him. If you've ever felt invisible, truly invisible, like you're a ghost moving through a world that doesn't see you, then you know what Sarah felt in that moment. But in that moment, on that sidewalk, with a little boy breathing and a giant of a man staring at her with tears on his face, Sarah wasn't invisible. She was seen. She was real. She mattered. And sometimes that's what heroes look like. Not people in capes or uniforms, but 10-year-old girls in secondhand shoes that don't match, living in alleys, carrying everything they own in a torn backpack. Sometimes heroes are the ones everyone else has decided aren't worth looking at. The morning after Michael came home from the hospital, Thomas Peterson woke with singular purpose burning in his chest. Find the girl. Find Sarah. The doctors had confirmed what Thomas already knew. Without that CPR, without those crucial minutes, Michael would have died on that sidewalk. Brain damage at minimum. More likely, he simply wouldn't have made it. A 10-year-old homeless kid had saved his son's life and then vanished like smoke. Thomas started where it happened, standing on that sidewalk in morning light. Michael's blue bicycle now safely in their garage. He looked at the alley where Sarah had emerged from. Empty now. Nothing that suggested a child lived there. But someone had to know something. He walked into Chen's corner store first. Mrs. Chen looked up, and her expression shifted when she saw the Hells Angels patch. Caution, careful neutrality. "Morning," Thomas said, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm looking for information about a kid. 10 years old, thin, wearing oversized clothes. Might come around here sometimes." Mrs. Chen's face gave nothing away. "Many kids come in here. This one's homeless, living on the streets. She saved my son's life yesterday. I need to find her. Need to thank her." Something flickered in Mrs. Chen's eyes. Recognition, maybe sympathy, but she shook her head. "I mind my business. You should too." It went like that all morning. Nobody wanted to talk to the Hells Angel about the homeless kid. What Thomas didn't know was that Sarah was watching him from a parking garage 3 blocks away, terrified that the man had come back angry, terrified that yesterday's miracle was about to become today's nightmare. 2 days of searching taught Thomas patience he didn't know he possessed. On the 3rd day, he tried the public library. He found Sarah in the back corner, tucked into a chair too big for her, a book open in her lap, trying to fold herself into invisibility. Sarah's head snapped up the moment Thomas rounded the bookshelf. Her eyes went wide, body tensed, every muscle coiled to run. Thomas stopped moving, held perfectly still. "Hey," he said, barely above a whisper. Then he did something Sarah didn't expect. He sat down, not in the chair next to her, but on the floor, back against the bookshelf opposite, creating distance, lowering himself so he wasn't looming. Thomas didn't speak again. He simply reached into the bag he'd been carrying and pulled out a sandwich, chips, an apple, water. Placed them on the floor between them, an offering. Then he pulled out a book and opened it, pretended to read, gave Sarah space to decide what happened next. The silence stretched. 1 minute, 5, 10. Sarah's eyes kept darting between Thomas, the food, and the nearest exit. 15 minutes. 20. Thomas turned a page he hadn't read. Waited. At 30 minutes, Sarah whispered, "Is your son okay?" Thomas looked up, met those weary eyes. "He's perfect, because of you." The next morning, Sarah returned to her spot near the alley. It was routine, the small rituals that structured her days. She was sitting on the cracked curb when she heard it. At first, just a distant rumble, but then it got louder, closer. Not thunder, but something mechanical and purposeful. One motorcycle, then another, then more. The sound built like a wave rolling down the quiet street. 3 motorcycles became 5. 5 became 10. 10 became 15. 15 became 20. 20 became 23. Neighbors emerged onto porches. Parents grabbed their children. Everyone knew that patch. Everyone knew what Hell's Angels meant. The convoy rolled down Riverside Street like thunder given form, chrome gleaming, leather and metal and raw power moving in perfect formation. And they stopped in front of Sarah. Every single one. Engines cutting off in sequence until the roar faded to silence. And 23 men astride their bikes faced a 10-year-old girl with her back against a fence and nowhere to run. Thomas stepped off his bike first. He walked toward Sarah slowly, deliberately, and her eyes were wide with confusion and fear. "We've been looking for you, sister," Thomas said. "Sister, not kid, not girl, sister." Sarah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Behind Thomas, 23 grown men, leather vests decorated with patches earned through loyalty and blood, tattooed arms, weathered faces, lives lived on the edge, stood in formation. They'd come for a homeless 10-year-old who owned nothing but a torn backpack. Thomas reached into his saddlebag and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. He knelt down, bringing himself to Sarah's eye level, and held it out. "Open it." Sarah's hands shook as she unwrapped the package. Inside was leather, soft, supple, clearly new. A vest, child-sized, custom-made. No patches yet, but the leather itself was protection, belonging, family. "You saved one of ours," Thomas said. "That makes you one of ours." The Hells Angels had connections, and Thomas knew exactly how to use them. The bike shop owner gave them a bicycle, reliable, sturdy, something that said Sarah belonged. The landlord on 8th Street had a studio apartment above a dry cleaner that had been empty for 6 months. When Thomas told him the story, really told it, the man said, "First year's free." The school principal had told the Hells Angels no 100 times over the years. But when Thomas showed up and told her about Sarah, about her mother dying, about foster care failures, about a girl who'd learned CPR because she promised herself she'd never be unprepared again, Mrs. Patterson's rules had room for exceptions. "Bring her in Monday. We'll get her enrolled." 3 days after the motorcycles rolled down Riverside Street, Sarah walked into her new apartment for the first time. Small, just one room with a tiny kitchen and bathroom. But it was clean, safe. It had a lock on the door that Sarah controlled. In the center sat a bed, a desk, and a note in Thomas's blocky handwriting. "We'll help you fill it. Welcome home, your sister." Your brothers, Sarah stood in that doorway and cried for the first time in 2 years. 3 days later, social services showed up. Her name was Jennifer Kowalski, and she'd been a caseworker for Child Protective Services for 11 years. When the anonymous call came in about a 10-year-old living alone in an apartment, being supported by members of a motorcycle club, every alarm went off. She knocked on Thursday afternoon, clipboard in hand. When Sarah answered, this small girl with weary eyes and clothes that finally fit, Jennifer saw exactly what her training told her to see. Red flags everywhere. A child living alone. No legal guardian. Financial support from a motorcycle club with a documented criminal history. A 10-year-old who should be in the system, in a proper foster placement. "Are you Sarah Turner?" Professional, distant. Sarah nodded, hand tight on the doorframe. "I'm from Child Protective Services. I need to ask you some questions." Within 3 hours, Jennifer had filed an emergency petition with family court. Thomas stood in that cramped CPS office, hands clenched, voice level. You know what that kid did? She saved my son's life. Performed CPR when he stopped breathing. Where were you then? Where was the system when she was sleeping in condemned buildings? When she was eating from dumpsters? When she was invisible and nobody cared? Jennifer's face remained neutral. Mr. Peterson, I understand you're grateful, but gratitude doesn't qualify someone as a guardian. You have a criminal record. You're affiliated with an organization that what? That showed up for her? That gave her a home? That made sure she had food and people who actually see her? Mr. Peterson, the law is clear. A minor cannot live without proper guardianship. If you want to pursue legal custody, there's a process. Until then, Sarah needs emergency foster care. The words hit like a physical blow. Foster care. The same system that had failed Sarah before. You can't, Thomas said, voice breaking. You can't put her back in that. I don't have a choice, Jennifer said, almost sorry. I'm filing the paperwork now. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. Family court. Judge Rebecca Hartman presiding. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, fluorescent lights making everything harsh and cold. Thomas sat at one table with a lawyer the club had paid for. Sarah sat beside him in new clothes that Michael had helped pick out, looking smaller than ever. Jennifer Kowalski sat at the other table with the county attorney. In the gallery behind Thomas, 23 Hells Angels filled the benches. Silent, watchful. The character witnesses came one by one. Ms. Olivia from the shelter testified about the CPR class, about how Sarah had paid attention like her life depended on it, had asked questions, had wanted to be ready. The library coordinator talked about finding Sarah there every day, reading, learning, never causing trouble, just trying to better herself. Michael's doctor explained the medical reality. Without CPR, Michael Peterson would have died. The person who saved him was sitting right there. Neighbors testified about the transformation they'd witnessed. The girl who'd been invisible, suddenly seen, suddenly cared for, suddenly thriving. And then Michael walked up to the judge's bench. 7 years old in a blue shirt, clutching a piece of paper folded so many times it was soft as cloth. Judge Hartman leaned down. Hello, sweetheart. What do you have there? Michael unfolded the drawing. It showed a boy on a bike, an angel without wings wearing oversized clothes, and words written in careful crayon. She saved me. Don't take her away. That's Sarah, Michael said, voice small but certain. She's my hero and she's my dad's sister now. You can't take sisters away from brothers. That's not fair. Judge Rebecca Hartman had been on the bench for 19 years. She'd presided over cases involving the Hells Angels, had sent some members to prison, had no illusions about who they were. But she also knew what service looked like, what brotherhood meant, what it meant when grown men showed up not to intimidate, but to stand witness for a child. She looked at Thomas. Mr. Peterson, you understand the responsibility you're requesting? Yes, Your Honor, more than anything. And you understand this court will be monitoring this placement? That any violation will result in immediate removal? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Hartman looked at Sarah. Young woman, is this what you want? Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Temporary guardianship granted to Thomas Peterson, pending full adoption proceedings. Case management will conduct regular home visits. We'll reconvene in 6 months. The gavel came down. The courtroom erupted, not with cheers, but with the release of held breath, with relief, with the weight of fear lifting. Sarah collapsed into Thomas's arms. This girl who'd learned not to cry, finally letting herself break because she was safe enough to fall apart. In the back row, 23 Hells Angels stood, not celebrating, just standing in respect, in recognition. Brothers welcoming a sister home. 6 months can feel like forever when you're 10 years old. 6 months ago, Sarah Turner had been invisible, a ghost girl living in alleys, carrying everything she owned in a torn backpack. Now, on a Tuesday morning in October, Sarah walked through the front doors of Jefferson Elementary with a backpack full of school supplies and a lunch Thomas had packed that morning. Other kids knew her name. Some were even her friends, real friends who saved her seats at lunch and invited her to birthday parties. After school, Sarah rode her bicycle home, the red and silver one from the bike shop that she'd named Phoenix because it sounded tough and free. Thomas jogged beside her like he did every day, close enough to catch her if she fell, far enough to let her find her balance. "You're getting too fast for me, kid," Thomas called out, slightly winded. "You're just getting old," Sarah shot back, grinning. "Watch it or I'll make you do dishes for a month." They both laughed. Easy banter that felt like home. Dinner that evening was spaghetti, Michael's favorite. They sat around the kitchen table like they'd been doing it forever. Michael talked about his science project on volcanoes. Sarah added her own stories. Thomas watched them both with something dangerously close to complete happiness. After dinner, Thomas handed Sarah a small package wrapped in black cloth. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a patch, embroidered letters on leather backing meant to be sewn onto her vest. 2 words, family first. "Every Hell's Angel earns their patches," Thomas said quietly. "This one? You earned it the day you saved Michael. But it took 6 months for the club to make it official. You're one of us now, Sarah. Really one of us." Sarah traced the letters with her finger, eyes burning with tears. She didn't try to hide anymore. She'd learned it was okay to cry when you were happy. Remember that alley where Sarah used to hide? The Hells Angels had transformed it, cleaned it out, brought in soil and lumber, built raised garden beds, planted vegetables anyone in the neighborhood could harvest. They'd put up a sign, "Community Garden." Take what you need. Give what you can. It wasn't charity, it was a statement. A reminder that invisible people existed, that they mattered, that somebody cared. On a Saturday morning, Sarah stood in front of a room at the 5th Street shelter, looking out at 15 faces wearing the same expression she used to wear. Weary hope mixed with exhaustion that comes from surviving when the world wants you to disappear. Mrs. Hunt, Olivia stood beside her, hand on her shoulder, tears already forming because she understood the poetry of this moment. The girl who'd learned CPR in this very room 6 months ago was now teaching others. "My name is Sarah," she began, voice stronger than it had any right to be. "6 months ago, I was living on the streets. I learned CPR here because I wanted to be ready, just in case. I never thought I'd actually use it. But then a little boy fell off his bike and stopped breathing. And everything I learned here, everything Miss Olivia taught me, saved his life." She paused, looking at each person. "You never know when you'll be someone's miracle. But you can be ready. You can be brave. You can show up. That's what I'm here to teach you today." For the next hour, Sarah demonstrated chest compressions, explained rescue breaths, walked them through the steps with patience and clarity. "Doing something is always better than doing nothing," she told them. "Even if you're scared, even if you're not sure, trying to save someone is always the right choice." Thomas stood in the back, Michael holding his hand, watching this girl who'd become his daughter teach courage to strangers. 6 months ago, he'd been ready to throw Sarah aside, had seen danger where there was heroism. Now he understood. Sometimes angels wear secondhand shoes. Sometimes heroes are the ones society overlooks. Sometimes the people we're quickest to judge are the ones most ready to save us. And sometimes family isn't born. It isn't about blood or biology or legal documents. Sometimes family is chosen, earned, built from courage and gratitude, and 23 motorcycles rolling down a quiet street to say, "You're one of ours now." Built from a father learning that brotherhood means showing up. From a community deciding invisible children deserve to be seen. From a girl who'd lost everything, finding out that sometimes when you save someone else, you save yourself too. But who saves the thousands of other invisible children still living in alleys, still eating from dumpsters, still wondering if anyone would notice if they disappeared? That answer starts with people like you. If this story moved you, do 3 things. First, subscribe because stories like this remind us that goodness exists, that unexpected heroes walk among us, that hope isn't naive, it's necessary. Hitting subscribe means you're choosing to see people others ignore, choosing to believe that ordinary moments can contain extraordinary courage. Click it if you're standing against indifference. Second comment, no more invisible kids. Every comment is a vote for compassion over judgment, for action over apathy. Let's flood this section with people who believe every child deserves a chance, who understand that society is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable. Make your voice count. Third, share this video. Someone in your life needs to remember that one person can change everything. That courage doesn't require resources, just heart. Heroes don't always look like what you expect. Sometimes they look like a boy who needs help. Sometimes they look like bikers on motorcycles. Sometimes they look like the person you're ignoring on the street corner. That's how you change a city. That's how you prove family isn't about blood. It's about showing up when someone needs saving.